Thanks, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I know we are the last thing between you and whatever fun things you're going to do in Las Vegas tonight. So thanks for sticking around. We have a great panel, a lot of great issues, as you probably have followed. There's really no better time or bigger issue in the auto industry and in the tech industry, the move to autonomous cars, connected cars, and all the various ride sharing, ride hailing options that consumers are facing. So let's get right into it. For our first panelist, we're going to start with Nicole. Everybody's going to give some brief opening comments, and we're going to get right into it.
Great. Hi, I'm Nicole Mace. I'm the VP of Product and Member Experience at Zipcar. Zipcar's been around for 16 years, so we were the pioneer in the car sharing space, which is really exciting. And the idea was really just all about, can we come up with a way to make a difference so that people can have the benefit of having a car without the cost and hassle. And that's what Zipcar was founded on. We were the first ones in the space, and we're still there. And it's really exciting to see more competitors come to the space, but what it means is the market has grown significantly. We have 1 million members now worldwide. We're global. We're in hundreds of cities and towns across the world, 600 universities. So it's an exciting time for Zipcar, and we're looking forward to autonomous cars in the future.
Great. Nat, who's got his hands full with a lot of different balls in the air at NHTSA.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nat Buse. I am responsible for the vehicle safety research program at the agency that's responsible for setting and enforcing motor vehicle safety standards in the United States. So as David pointed out, my portfolio is actually quite big. These days I spend a lot of my time on cybersecurity and automated vehicles, connected vehicles, but not just that stuff, but also the kind of mundane stuff about protecting people when they get in crashes. And why is that important? Because the crash numbers are still too high. 35,092 is where we were at in 2015. And for those who don't follow the NHTSA stats all that much, that was, in 1 year, we had wiped out almost a decade of safety gains that we had done with the industry in terms of regulations, proactive principles by them, putting technology into the fleet. And so for us, this promise of automated and connected vehicles really means a chance to take a big bite out of that fatality number, because we believe that the idea of mobility shouldn't mean that you have to expect to get in a car crash. I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands how many people in this room have been in a car crash, it's probably just about everybody. And that's too high a toll to pay. And so for us, it's all about supporting the innovation and the deployment and the rapid deployment of these technologies as fast as we can. And we'll talk about some of the ways we're doing that when we get going.
Before we get to Jeff, I want to just throw out a couple of numbers that Nat mentioned. In 2015, there were about 35,000 people killed in the United States. The number increased by about 7%. It was the largest single percentage increase in motor vehicle deaths in the United States since the mid-'60s. Yep. In addition to that, more than 2 million people are injured in car crashes every year, and about 6 million crashes are reported to police. So when you break those numbers down, it's roughly 1 crash for every 50 Americans. And according to NHTSA and CDC numbers, the aggregate costs of car crashes in the United States are upwards of $900 billion a year when you factor the cost of injuries, congestion, and the various other costs. So it's a massive issue for both the economy and for safety.
And that's the only cost that we can actually measure.
Right.
So congestion, you're stuck in traffic, or a few days lost productivity because you were in the hospital. That doesn't take into account kind of the lifetime impairment that some people have after they've been in a crash, in a serious crash. I had a good friend of mine who was just in a crash, and just this year, he was just not able to get back to normal sleep pattern. Wow. That's not captured in that huge cost number that David mentioned. Right. And I think that's part of the problem, is that these crashes happen in the kind of isolated instances and not in aggregate, as a big jetliner crash or something like that. And so we've become numb to these statistics, and it's really time to kind of change our focus to really figure out how we can bring in mobility, bring in new technology to really deal with these statistics that are just off the chart.
Jeff?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Jeff Steffen. I'm a global public policy manager at GM. And just to sort of build off the safety discussion, I thought maybe I'd highlight some of the advancements that GM has made in the areas of safety and connectivity. When you think about today's modern vehicle, it has tremendous computing power. It has millions of lines of computer code. It has upwards to 30 what we call electronic control units, which are really embedded computers in the car. And when you combine that with connectivity, we really feel like that's where the magic happens. And it really allows innovative solutions, particularly in safety, that were really never available before. Traditionally, when you talk about vehicle crashes, you talk about mitigating the effects of crashes, or things like seat belts and airbags and those sorts of things. But with today's technology, you can talk about avoiding the accidents or crashes altogether, and that's really important to GM as a company. And one example of that is our advancements in vehicle-to-vehicle communication. For those of you who aren't familiar, what it does is it allows vehicles to essentially talk to each other and exchange important safety information that would allow the driver to then avoid a crash. GM has announced that it's going to be the first automaker to deploy V2V in our vehicles in our model year 17 Cadillac CTS. So we're very pleased about that. And I think when you talk about these types of issues, you really have to talk about automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles. And that's another area that GM is really focused upon. We have a dedicated engineering team that's focused solely upon bringing this technology to market. We recently acquired Cruise Automation, which is a Silicon Valley software development company that's really going to complement and help us really expedite this technology. And with Lyft as well. We have a strategic partnership with Lyft, and we're really excited about the potential to launch autonomous vehicles and perhaps a ride-sharing network. So those are some of our new developments, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Moselle. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at AT&T. I am responsible for IoT. So what AT&T looks at as IoT is that anything that's not a smartphone or a tablet, we provide the connectivity, the solution to connect to our network. Connected car being one of our largest verticals that we're focused on today. But I think the one thing that I want to kind of leave you guys with is that the connected car to AT&T is really just more than just the relationships with the automotive companies like GM. It's also an aftermarket play, because right now, today, there's about 160 million cars to 200 million cars that are not connected today, that will have to be connected to be able to utilize, whether we're doing some vehicle-to-vehicle or vehicle-to-infrastructure. So we're also focused on the aftermarket play, but also another big play is the usage-based insurance that everybody is familiar with. I mean, you see the claim to fame that I'm sure everybody knows is Progressive, of how to get the insurance discount. So that's another big vertical for us. But the one thing about the connected car, I think, which is important is safety is the number one concern. We're providing the connectivity, but we're working with, all the automotive companies to make sure that it remains safe. And it started with AT&T. If you look at it from when we started with the It Can Wait campaign, which was just texting and driving, put your phone down and don't do that. Well, we've expanded that now to bring the technology in the car. So as we're actually working with the different automotive companies, we want to make sure that we're bringing the technology in there, but the technology is there to minimize the driver distraction. We don't want to actually put technology in the car that's going to increase the fatalities or keep NAT busy doing a lot of extra stuff. So we want to make sure that we're also there being good corporate citizens and making sure that we're delivering it safe. But I think the other thing that you really want to look at with the technology in the car is that we all had tablets to begin with. And you remember the tablet applications that you had? They were the smartphone applications that were just blown up onto your tablet. Well, you're going to see a lot of that stuff when it comes to the car. These are applications that are made specifically for the car, and with the fact to make sure that we minimize driver distraction and safety in the vehicles. So it's not going to be just your smartphone applications in the car. There's going to be special care and special attention, so it's actually fitted specifically for the connected car.
Thanks. Tim?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Timothy Burr, and I'm the Senior Public Policy Manager for Lyft. I handle public policy on our West Coast team. Spent a lot of time in California and Nevada and all around the Southwest, working with policymakers and regulators on the state level, on the municipal level, county governments, whatever it might be. And from time to time, get to pop out to DC when they let me go. Lyft was started in 2012 in San Francisco. We were the first peer-to-peer ride-sharing company. So the idea that folks, maybe non-professional drivers, would be able to go through a number of processes and to be able to share rides with their neighbors. Our co-founders launched with the vision of really making carpooling mainstream, filling up the empty seats in the car. There was an interesting statistic that one of our co-founders came across, and that was that 80% of seats in all cars are vacant at all times, which is just a fancy way of saying we like to drive by ourselves. As we all know, as the stress on our infrastructure, cities, congestion, as these all continue, we need solutions to these issues, and we see Lyft and what we've been doing and able to make carpooling mainstream as those solutions. We recently, well, it's been a little bit of time now actually, but in 2014 we launched what's called Lyft Line, which is our carpooling product where multiple folks who are traveling separately can actually share a ride together. And it's a benefit for everyone. It's a benefit for those who can split the cost of a ride, as well as the driver who sort of avoids that deadheading or having time where he or she is not driving somebody in the car but going somewhere. In January of this year, we announced a big strategic partnership with GM. And there's really two main parts to that partnership. The first is a program called Express Drive, which maybe we'll talk about if we get into that today. But the second part, which I think we'll spend quite a bit of time speaking about this evening, was researching and moving forward on autonomous vehicle technology. We're confident at Lyft that for folks to be introduced to AVs, to be used to the concept of them, deploying autonomous vehicles through a network is a place where Lyft will thrive, and we're excited about that partnership with GM.
Well, let's start with NAT. I mentioned the opening that NAT's very busy, and if you've been following what the NHTSA has been doing, there's a full plate. Nat, can you talk about the various sort of big-ticket issues that you're working on now, from V2V rulemaking to autonomous vehicle guidelines, cybersecurity guidance, as well as the second phase of distraction driving guidelines?
Yeah, so, and Nicole kind of touched on it, kind of how big let's say the ecosphere is getting there. It used to be I used to be able to go to Detroit and do my business a day and come home. Now I have to go to Detroit, and I was complaining to Jeff about having to come to the West Coast too many times this year. But it's really exciting because there are all these new players. So what happens when you have all these new players? Well, there's sort of this artificial, traditional versus innovator pull that people like to tug at. And the way we see it is that you need both, right? You can't just pick one solution over the other. So since the beginning of the year, under Secretary Fox's leadership, he sort of announced these big four initiatives. And actually one of them started in December of the previous year, where we got the traditional automakers to agree to a set of proactive safety principles. So what does that mean? So in there are a whole bunch of initiatives that we want industry to do on their own. Not so much relying on NHTSA to be the enforcer or the regulator, but taking a leadership role in safety. And all 18 CEOs signed on the dotted line and said they're going to do that. And so he announced that in January. As part of that, there was a big focus on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been something that the industry didn't really want to talk a lot about because afraid of the bad guys sort of getting the keys to the kingdom. But that doesn't mean that the vehicles were as unsafe as you might have read in some of the newspaper articles. So what we've done, sort of in the back room a little bit, but still very much out in public, we had a big public meeting on this in January, where we tried to pull together the best of the best. We brought together the hackers, we brought together the auto industry, we brought together people from DoD, we brought together people from medical device side of things to figure out what are we going to do about cybersecurity on automobiles. And that actually led to the creation of a set of best practices that the industry announced in July. We, NHTSA, are working on our own set of best practices because we're not just merely concerned about cybersecurity at the light vehicle level, we're actually also concerned about cybersecurity when it comes to, let's say, heavy trucks. I don't think I have to go too much further. We can all imagine what a heavy truck under some automated scenario would do if it's not very secure. And so that is a big pillar of focus for the agency, both in terms of bringing the posture up in the US, but also in terms of making sure all the players involved, right? So the insurance dongle got mentioned. That is one where we've actually talked about quite a bit, where a great piece of innovation, but they left out the safety piece on the cybersecurity. There's big vulnerabilities in those devices, and so we've been working with the insurance industry to figure out how can they overlay some security protocols on those dongles, because those dongles are direct access into the vehicle, and they're oftentimes Wi-Fi enabled, et cetera. Some other things we've been working on is on the connected vehicle space, and there's a lot of discussion about whether it's DSRC or whether it's 4G or 5G or LTE, can they all serve the same purpose? And one of the messages coming very strong from the department is there is a space for both. For safety, we think that DSRC is the way to go. We're working on a rulemaking to require that on all light vehicles. There's a big focus on aftermarket, especially because of the point that was mentioned about how long it takes to turn vehicles over in the fleet. I can tell you it's about 3 decades, 30 years or so, before you get one singular piece of technology to approach like 99%, right? There's still that 57 Chevy is still running around out there somewhere. And so the aftermarket has to be a viable solution. I was actually just talking to a company downstairs that's working on a very neat product that actually does exactly that. Takes DSRC, takes communications technology, overlays it with some camera stuff, and voila, you have connected vehicle on an old car. But for us, you got to have some standards, and that's what we're working on, is to make sure that the security protocols are in place and that everybody can communicate in the same way and understand each other. We're not going crazy and requiring a bunch of applications. It's really just about the communications protocol. The other thing the Secretary announced was the fact that we know in the US we've got some work to do when it comes to automated vehicles. So one, we wanted to take a look at our safety standards and see were there any prohibitions. And so we did that work, and we found out for a traditional vehicle, we're not standing in the way. But if you want to remove the steering wheel and brake pedals, yeah, then we have some challenges. And so that's an area that we'll have to work on in the coming years. The other 3 pieces we wanted to work on had to do with what new tools and authorities we might need or want in this space. The other one was about providing guidance, and that's one that's been maybe the biggest attention getter, is that we would like to provide guidance to the industry, all these folks sitting on the stage with me, whether they're a manufacturer, whether they're a service provider like Lyft or Uber, or whether they're just a technology company. There's a lot of new players in this space, and some of them don't really understand NHTSA's authority, don't understand who NHTSA is, and so part of what we're doing is going to kind of unravel all that for everyone, including a big focus on testing. Testing is very, very key in this space to build public confidence, and the way we've done it in the past has been people test in the roadways and no one really knows, and there might be need to do a better look at that going forward.
Well, Tim, let me ask you to follow up on that. I mean, obviously, Lyft and GM have talked about within the next year, roughly, that you want to do autonomous vehicle testing. Do you think, is the public ready for that, for actual consumers in vehicles, in ride sharing, if there's not a driver actually, manning the steering wheel?
Yeah, I don't know so much about the timelines and where those might be, so I can't quite comment on that. But I will say this: I think what I've experienced is that Lyft, other ride-sharing platforms, car-sharing platforms, they've certainly forced folks, or given folks the opportunity to think differently about transportation. Right? It wasn't that long ago, certainly when I turned 16, my number one thing I was focused on, granted it was the night of my junior prom, but was getting my driver's license. That was the most important thing in the world, and today's 16-year-olds, 17, 18-year-olds don't necessarily think that way. With ride-sharing, car-sharing platforms, folks have the opportunity to maybe think twice about buying that second car, or they know that they can maybe take public transportation because they have a way to sort of bridge that first and last mile. So I think Lyft certainly feels like our experience in the last few years, right? We've gotten folks comfortable with the idea of doing something that literally your mother told you never to do, which was sharing a ride or getting in the car of a stranger. And now we're taking that a step further by asking folks to not only share a ride with someone they don't know who's the driver, but also with another passenger in terms of real-time carpooling. So I do think that these are all broader changes in transportation, and I'd like to think that folks are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of thinking differently about what are the ways that we can maximize safety, congestion reduction, and just sort of think differently about driving themselves.
And the numbers for ride sharing are huge. I think the last number I saw is about less than 4% of all miles currently are ride sharing, and that by 2030 it could be as high as 25 or 30%. So those numbers are going to grow pretty fast. Along with ride sharing, you've got car sharing.
Yeah.
Places like New York City where it may cost $3 a mile to own a car.
Yeah.
Car sharing may be a much more economical route. Where do you see car sharing fitting into this new ecosystem, and where does Zipcar, how does Zipcar feel about autonomous cars, and will there need to be ride sharing if there are fully autonomous cars?
Yeah, so I agree. In many ways, there is this seismic shift going on when people think about transportation. It isn't, I'm going to have this big capital expense and buy this vehicle. It's, I'm thinking about that trip that I'm taking. I'm going to pay by trip rather than I'm going to pay, put a huge chunk of money down. So there's definitely that shift that is happening. What's happening with car sharing, what we know today is a car sharing vehicle takes 13 other cars off the road. For Zipcar in particular, one of our vehicles serves 50 of our members. So what we're seeing is a shift in the way people are living. 50% of our members actually don't own cars. And we know, back to your point about not needing a car, today we know urban dwellers, so we find that folks that live in cities, it doesn't matter whether they're a millennial or an urban dweller, they actually would much rather give up their car than their cell phone, right? Their mobile phone is much more important to them. So the world is changing substantially. At the same time, it's growing. People are giving up their cars. Today, BCG has a study out recently that says there are 5 million global global users of car sharing by 2021. I think we're up to 35 million people will be using car sharing. So at the same time that autonomous cars are coming in, car sharing is developing and really catching on as a way that people are thinking about their trips. How am I going to make that trip? Do I need a car? Sometimes I need a car, and that's where car sharing comes in. You're going to IKEA, you're going to hit a bunch of errands, you're going hiking up in the White Mountains, you need a car. So there is absolutely a place for car sharing. I think it's just going to grow. One of the things that we've seen with car sharing, and I think will carry through to autonomous cars, is the ability to choose the right car for the use case. We know from our members that I'm going to go grocery shopping, I want a utility car, so I need a car that's inexpensive, that has room for my groceries, that has room for my dry cleaning. Or it's date night and I want a luxury car that's a nice car. Or it's Saturday and I'm taking 5 kids around to soccer and I need room for their soccer balls and all the gear and all the kids. So really matching that use case with car is really this huge benefit of car sharing, and that will continue on with autonomous cars. So we see the platform that we have is extremely flexible, and I think when we think about moving forward, we are very, very focused on a very nimble technology and operations that allow us to support what is ahead. We are not going to develop an autonomous car. That's not in our wheelhouse. But what we will do is we'll continue to allow people to use our service to schedule an autonomous car instead of walking two doors down to get a car. Car will come to you, right? So it's actually not that much of a shift for our service. So we're looking forward to what's ahead. And I think with the costs of autonomous cars, and I know there are all kinds of different numbers out there, but the reality is they're going to be expensive. So car sharing is a perfect fit. And we think by being the leader and being that pioneer and having a very flexible platform, we'll be in there. And so will many of our competitors as well. I don't think anyone quite knows how things are going to fall out. It's perhaps a bumpy road, and it'll probably be very different by geography and by city. So that's another challenge for us as we look at this transition that's headed over time. What Paris does may be quite different than what Las Vegas or Boston does. And so we need to be able to support all different combinations of what's happening from a car sharing to traditional car all the way through autonomous cars. So that's what we're trying to set ourselves up for.
Jeff, what's GM doing to address the $10 trillion mobility market beyond just selling cars, especially when you consider Wall Street analysts like Barclays have said that if autonomous cars are widely adopted by 2030, the U.S. could be selling 1/3 fewer cars than they are now because autonomous cars can be on the road longer. They're not empty 80% of the time. They're not sitting in driveways 90% of the time as current cars are. So how does GM address a market where there may not be as many cars sold and there's people are looking for more options than just buying a new car?
Yeah, thanks. You know, our CEO, Mary Barra, often says that she thinks the auto industry is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 50. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, there's no doubt that the industry is facing disruption. And I think at GM, we've really made the decision, instead of fearing that change, we really are seeking to lead it. And some examples of that are, we are actually in the car sharing business as well. We've launched a new brand called Maven that'll allow you to connect to one of our vehicles through a mobile app. So we're looking at car sharing, Maven is actually launched in about 4 cities across the country, and it's growing rapidly globally, in fact. Because there's no doubt that folks are looking at alternative mobility options. I think our strategic investment in Lyft is another example of that in the ride sharing. And I think when you think about autonomous, it all sort of comes together in the sense that, you know, when you talk about the best ways to deploy autonomous vehicles, and I think ride sharing is very interesting because you can do so in controlled environments, whether it be like a geo-fenced area and under controlled conditions, that allow the public to experience the technology without having to, you know, incur the cost if they were to buy one on a retail level. And as part of that, you can gather data, which I think is going to be critical for policymakers to really determine, you know, how the technology works, sort of prove out some of the safety claims, because the technology itself has great promise in terms of safety. You know, I think Nat knows better than all of us, but you know, 94% of all vehicle crashes are caused by human error. And I think what's really exciting and the great promise of, you know, highly automated vehicles is to significantly reduce that. And so I think that just to kind of shift it a little bit to a policy perspective, from a policy perspective, you have to worry about deploying the technology in a safe manner. And on the other hand, it's important because of the safety potential to try to move it along as quickly as possible. And I think ride sharing provides an interesting path to do that.
And I think some of the things you hear from some of the other players in the space is that by not selling the car directly to an individual, the autonomous car, you avoid them using it in snow or in inclement weather where maybe the technology is not ready, and you do have a lot more control over where those cars are actually used. Joe, AT&T, I think, has helped connect about 7 million cars today, and you're adding about 1 million a quarter. How crucial is the role of telecommunications providers to make V2V connected vehicles a reality, and what do you see in the near term as the biggest advantage to a more connected fleet?
Okay. Well, I'll just build upon what Nat said earlier, is that, you know, I think there's competing technologies on what the vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure. We look at as the wireless technology, LTE, as a good complement to the technology. It provides an extra layer of security, which is needed in the connected vehicle. But I think the important thing when you kind of look at it is that the first thing that you need is the cars need to be connected. And, you know, what Nat said really has to kind of make sense to everybody, is that it'll be 30 years on the road, is what he said, is for all the cars to be connected. So even though, you know, you see everybody, whether it's GM, whether it's BMW, whether it's Tesla, all showing these connected cars, most of the cars that are sold today are not connected. Right. Most of the cars that were sold 5 years ago were not even thought about being connected. And I think that's something that you have to really think about, is that it's not only what are the existing automotive companies doing for the future sales, we also have to start thinking about what are you going to do for the cars that are on the road. And I know Nat gave a bookend example, but it's everything from, think about it, it's like a 2005 car, it's a 2010 car. There's a lot of vehicles that are recent, that are in your driveway that we're not using, they're not connected. So how do we actually figure out how to make those connected so that service could actually be functional? You know, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure only makes sense when a majority of the cars are communicating to each other. If there's only 2% of the cars or 5% of the cars communicating to each other, it's not going to be perfect information. And I think that's the one thing that AT&T also looks at, is that how do we actually provide that technology, provide the connection so that those services could be better going forward into the future. Because I think right now we have to actually get that revolution. We actually have to get all those cars connected. I think you're at the crossroad where, you know, the companies, the ecosystems are demanding that they be connected. The consumers want those to be connected. We did a study that's saying that right now one of the #1 choices of you selecting which car to purchase is the technology in the car. It's no longer what is the mechanical stuff in the car, how fast does it go, you know, what does it have all the traditional automotive statistics. It's the technology in the car. Is it connected? Could I get a mobile hotspot? Could I get my Pandora radio in there? Is there the personalization? You know, it's no longer a linear experience in your car, it's the personalization. And I think that's everything that, you know, what we believe is wireless is, you know, the backbone is the power that's allowing this technology to kind of, you know, be a catalyst and grow going forward.
Nat, do you see autonomous vehicles and V2V complement each other? Are they sort of in competition? Will one ultimately, if we have fully autonomous cars, will we not need V2V, or where do you see them interacting?
I think we see them very much as kind of technologies coexisting. I mean, if you look at just the complexity of driving and the different scenarios that are out there, to not rely on multiple sensors is a way to kind of have unsuccessful outcomes. You know, if you look at why people are doing radar and camera, right? It's because camera is good in some conditions, radar is good in others. The two together, when they're fused, give you a much more powerful product than any one by itself. And so when you think about a vehicle, even if it's completely self-aware with onboard sensors, a bunch of solo operators, as I call them, running around the city doesn't really speak to a very efficient transportation network. But it also lends itself to, you know, blind spots around buildings and other things like that, where V2V can be a very powerful complement. And so as we, you know, do this, let's say, juggling act between all these technologies, I see them all as kind of not juggling in competition, but kind of all going down the lane together, and then they're all going to be there in the end, kind of to give us that ultimate full self-driving, and whatever else comes after that. You know, if you look at kind of just how technology progresses, there are going to be other technologies that will show up that will find a home and a role. Whether it's, you know, something in the back of the vehicle that might be used, whether it's some more advanced lighting techniques that might be used for some other scenarios. All of these technologies are going to be really important to really have a true vision of zero, which is what we have, which is nobody should die in a motor vehicle crash, right? I mean, that should be our goal. And so how do you get there? You've got to put technology in play, given the 94% stat, but we also have to be willing to accept that not all technology is going to be perfect, and there's going to be challenges. There's going to be effectiveness estimates that we have to worry about. And I think to the point that Nicole was talking about, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges, and you and I were chatting about this in the, I guess, so-called green room, I don't know what we'll call it, but there's kind of two big challenges with all of this technology that we're talking about. One is consumer adoption, and how do you get consumers to uptake this technology? All of us in this room have old cars. I've got a Jeep that's a 1991. I don't drive it very much, but I have one. And so Americans have old cars. They have some new cars, but they have a lot of old cars. And how do we get this fleet transition? Well, you can imagine a scenario where, let's say, a fleet company buys only vehicles that have all the safety features on them. Then those vehicles get to second and third owners at a much cheaper rate and a much faster rate than if allowed on their own. So that's one way. One is automakers on their own doing technology innovation fast and trying to push it out to the market as fast as possible. You know, we encourage that through the star rating program. They can also do it on their own, and they demonstrated that with agreeing to put automatic emergency braking on all vehicles as soon as possible. But there's a third piece here that's really important, which is consumer understanding how to use these technologies. And so can you imagine a day if you're getting in 3 or 4 vehicles in a week and the whole interior is all over the place? I think it's a conversation that we will have to have, all of us will have to have, about what should that package look like? What should consumers' understanding of these new technologies be? Because they're going to be different than what we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
No, Nat's exactly right. In fact, the average age of cars on the road has hit an all-time record in the last couple of years. I think it's 11.7 years. Yep. Cars have gotten much more reliable, and they're on the road longer, but as a result, some safety features aren't there. I think a third of cars on the road don't have side airbags because they were only made mandatory in 2000. Tim, how do you think your customers are going to respond to fully autonomous vehicles? Are they I mean, what's the acceptance rate and what's the concern? Obviously, we saw a huge amount of coverage when a Google car struck a bus, going 2 miles an hour. No one was injured. And Tesla has had a very, not an autonomous car, but with their autopilot technology, has had a fatal incident in May. How big a concern is it if there is, and there will most likely be problems because no computer is foolproof with autonomous cars? How's the public going to respond? Are they going to accept the fact that there may be problems in light of the 35,000 people who are killed mostly as a result of human error? Or is it going to spark calls to halt autonomous cars in their tracks?
Yeah, certainly. I think as the technologies, certainly as the regulations are developed, I think it's important to hear from all those voices that you just mentioned on all sides of the issue. I mean, I think just like any technology, you're going to have early adopters, right? You have your folks who are really excited about and I'm one of them, really excited about the prospect of autonomous vehicles and what that means. Before this life, I was a prosecutor, and I just was never stopped being fed up with driving under the influence convictions and just how prevalent of a problem that was. I saw Lyft as a solution to that problem, and an important one. And certainly that's another issue that I think autonomous vehicles can help solve. And so, I like to think of all the benefits. But certainly, all the voices should be heard at the table. I think in our experience, what has led to developing good regulations, getting people comfortable, is that sort of public discourse, having stakeholders be able to have their voices heard. And on the flip side, I think there will be people who are hesitant to adopt the technology. Nicole kind of hit at this, but you're also going to see a difference, I assume, between folks who live in the city versus folks who live, in a little bit more rural area. Like for me, it makes all the sense in the world to not have a car living in San Francisco because it means parking tickets and problems and all these issues. But for my parents who live in very rural California, they just can't even imagine a world where they weren't driving themselves all day. So, I think just like anything else, folks will see it differently, but it's important to have all their voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, what do you see as the barriers to entry or the regulatory efforts that could boost car sharing services?
So one of the challenges that we have, and I say it's a challenge, but ultimately it's just that we're learning and growing together, but it's really working with the cities, right? And getting the cities on board with what it means and the value that car sharing can bring to their city. They're very focused on, can we get people to their jobs that we weren't able to, that are too far from public transportation? Can we reduce congestion in our city? So they move at a different pace, right? So working with them as fast as this industry is moving, and we all, I'm sure, get things every single day of something new is happening. They don't move at that pace. Right. And cities globally move at different paces. Right. Berlin for us is sort of ground zero for car sharing. They've been in car sharing for years. Europe is way ahead. Madrid is all about electric vehicles for car sharing. So I think one of our challenges is really looking at these cities, really working with them on a really local level because they're all at different places, and continuing to talk with them and get them on board to understand what the benefits are and how they can grow with it.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, GM's had a lot of experience with OnStar in terms of connected vehicles and getting feedback or directly communicating with their owners. How do you build on that with introducing autonomous cars, connected cars, and what can the industry learn from the OnStar experience?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Folks are always, the new fad. I don't want to say it's a fad. It's certainly not a fad, but the Internet of Things is, getting a lot of attention these days, and it's a good thing. But I think sometimes people forget that, GM's been in the Internet of Things business for 20 years, in fact, right, with OnStar. We're having a 20-year anniversary, and the connected vehicle really is a game changer, I think, in terms of technologies for consumers and safety. OnStar's hallmark service is what we call automatic crash notification. And what that is if there's a serious vehicle crash, it automatically alerts the first responder community to the exact location of the vehicle crash to get help as quickly as possible. If you talk to emergency room professionals or first responders, they often talk about the golden hour, which is the first hour after a vehicle crash. Getting the right help there as quickly as possible, and the right kind of help sometimes can be the difference between life or death. And that's one thing that OnStar does enable. And it enables a lot of other things too, like navigation, on-demand diagnostics. So if you had your check engine lights on in your vehicle, it could be a serious problem, or maybe you didn't screw your gas cap on tightly. You can press a button and get to a live OnStar advisor that'll let you know what the problems are. So just recently, we've expanded to a 4G LTE connection within the vehicle, which allows us to do even more things with that platform. So with all those things over the course of 20 years, we've learned a lot. Learned a lot in areas of like data privacy, cybersecurity. I think that issues that are really at the forefront of the auto industry. We've had a lot of experience doing that, and we get into areas like automated vehicles. We build upon those lessons to really help move the technology forward. So we do view it as an advantage.
Joe, there's so many possibilities with connected vehicles. From it's already happening now. Your car alerts you you're going to need an oil change, you're going to run out of gas, or your battery's going to fail, or it tells you where your kids are if they're driving outside the geofence location. How much more beyond just our vehicles alerting us of a potential sort of intersection crash? How many more advantages are there to more connected vehicles, and how will that be integrated into our homes, our watches, our phones?
I think that's a good thing. I mean, what we said earlier is that when you look at the Internet of Things, I think up until this point, everything's been kind of growing in silos. The connected cars doing one thing, we're tracking, heavy machinery, agriculture is doing one thing, M-Health, consumer electronics, et cetera, et cetera. I think what you're going to start seeing is the convergence of those. And really, when you look at the whole smart city concept, it's everything, building off of each other. Is now that, we're doing stuff in our innovation labs, through our ecosystem partners, through our partners in the automotive companies, how do we actually integrate the car with your wearable device? I know there's, you could unlock your car, you could find your car through your wearable device. You could set a geofence like we just discussed, like David just discussed, but we could have a geofence that has your home automation system. You go down your driveway a certain day, the close procedure goes to your house. Make sure your garage door is locked, your doors are locked, your air condition is, turned up so you're not air conditioning your house when nobody's in there. And when you go in through the opposite way through the geofence, it goes through the opening procedure of your house. The lights turn on, it's more welcoming to you. So I think you're gonna see, not only is with cars being connected, but your homes being connected, your watches, your health, they're all going to be integrated together. I mean, who would you like right now is that your car gives you a diagnostic report when you're in there. That engine light is no longer a mystery for all of us. Why don't we get it fixed? Because we don't understand what it is, and we're concerned, it's going to cost me a lot of money. Well, now through, the OnStar system, it's not a mystery anymore. The decoder ring is there for you. Your engine light is on because your gas cap is not tight. Your engine light is on because your O2 sensors are failing. It's no longer a mystery to you. I mean, they're decoding that for you. But how else would you like it also to read you? You're in your car so much, everybody's in their car probably an hour a day. How would you like it to do some diagnostics on you? You could have sensors on your seatbelt. You could do a lot of different things where you're actually getting real-time diagnostics on your own body. So I think that's where the whole catapult going to be, and the catalyst for the whole Internet of Things is that how are these things going to communicate to each other, whether it's cars to cars or cars to infrastructure, cars to your house, cars to your wearable device, so on and so forth. And I think that's where it becomes really exciting, is how everything's connected, but your life isn't more complex, your life is simpler, and you're getting real-time information, you're getting information that is really actionable from your part. It's not just information just to give you information. It's information that you could actually act on and improve not only your car, your health, and your whole living.
And then your car could even send you the remote fix for whatever problem, over the airways to fix your sensor or whatever.
Exactly right. I think everybody looks at what's kind of the glamorous side of the connected car. You go, I could find my car. I could have my internet radio. I could do a lot of the stuff that, we find for our personal enjoyment. But there's a lot of software on your car, like Jeff was mentioning. Now that software, you don't have to wait till you go to the dealership. You don't have to get a postcard and say, hey, please come to the dealership because we have to upgrade your your software. We do that all the time on your smartphones. Your smartphones are continuously getting updates and firmware updates. Now with an LTE connection in your vehicles, we could do that over the air. You could do it whether it's on the Wi-Fi from your house, whether it's over the LTE network while the car is just sitting in your driveway or in the parking lot at work. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't actually realize. I go, there's the consumer-facing stuff that we all focus on, but there's a lot of administrative functions that we don't even think about, just updating the software and the firmware in your car that you're going to be able to do in a more efficient and effective manner.
Jeff, do you think that cars of the future will be more upgradable, as it's not going to be like GM rolling out the new models in September and the 57 Chevys are gone and the 58 is here?
Yeah, the over-the-air updates are very important for a lot of reasons. Actually, with GM, we've been doing those with our OnStar module since 2009. And you're exactly right with the 4G connection. It does allow for the possibility of more upgrades, and it's important for to keep consumers happy with the latest technology. It's important for safety, and it's important for cybersecurity as well, because cyber threats are constantly changing, and the ability to update your system to respond to those. I think it's an important piece to look at in terms of vehicle cybersecurity as well.
Well, Nat, how big is privacy and cybersecurity going to be? I mean, there have been a couple of recalls for cybersecurity issues. There have been no cases of a real-world car being taken over by a hacker, but certainly...
You should find some wood to knock on real quick.
Knock on, right. But certainly,
lots of stuff on the dark
but certainly
web.
Wired and others have demonstrated that it's possible, at least in some limited circumstances so far.
Yeah.
But how big a concern do you think privacy and cybersecurity is as our cars become more connected?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal. I was just reading, I guess earlier this week, somebody was making some noise about rental car companies having a lot of information about you by pairing your phone, which is actually what we want from a safety standpoint, right? Pair your phone, use the head unit.
Right.
So we still have some more work to do. I mean, I think the automakers, we had talked about privacy about 2 years ago, and then on their own, they went out and made some privacy principles. Probably time to look at those again. A lot's happened in the privacy sphere when it comes to what are the best practices for safeguarding consumers' privacy and consumer choice. On the cyber side, it continues to be a big topic of discussion, even within this administration. The president and his executive office is constantly putting out executive orders over the past couple months, ranging on all things on cybersecurity. In fact, Commerce is undertaking an effort on IoT. In general on cybersecurity, but we're looking at the vehicle space very specifically because I mentioned about supporting innovation. All these things that were mentioned, we're totally for them. We think they're great, but they need to be done in a way that's secure. And I think without having the right platform, Jeff didn't talk about that, but that's part of a key thing is you got to have the right platform to do some of these innovations. And so part of what we're working on in cybersecurity best practices is trying to articulate what are those best practices to enable some of this innovation.
Nicole, how concerned are your customers about privacy? I mean, are they willing to connect their phones to the Zipcar for the time? And do they worry that that data could end up sitting somewhere on a server somewhere?
Yeah, so I know it's a great question, and we have a membership, so we do have a privacy policy. We're very transparent. I think the previous panel, for those of you guys who are here, who owns that data?
Right.
Definitely the consumer owns that data. We try to be as transparent as possible so they know what we're doing with it. But at the same time, they're signing up for it. They are Zipcar cars. It's part of a membership. We need to know where those vehicles are. So we do share that information. Our members, we do have, you can sign up on your phone for Zipcar. It's something we launched. It's instant join and drive. You can sign up on your phone. We do a face matching within a couple minutes. You have passed the Zipcar kind of test, if you will, and you can be inside a car. You can use your phone to unlock the vehicle. It's a huge step forward for us, and it's also something that is expected really today. That if you're at a Starbucks and you see a Zipcar outside, you want to join. Of course, you could do it from your phone, right? So I think while there's security in communicating what we're capturing, there's also an expectation of how things should work. we find that sometimes our members will call us and they'll say, well, don't you know where the car is? And we'll say, well, no, we haven't pinged the car. We don't know where it is. But they have the assumption that we're tracking them every moment, even though we haven't said that we're going to go ahead and do that. So I think sometimes the expectations are even greater of what we're using their data for than we actually are.
Tim, you're a former prosecutor. How much is privacy a concern about Lyft? I mean, you're not an anonymous person driving your own car. I mean, do your customers worry that, hey, Lyft's got a record of everywhere I've been, every address I went?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you know, to piggyback off what was already mentioned with respect to privacy and data and all these sorts of things. I mean, quite frankly, I spend most of my time talking about safety, right? It's what we think is one of the biggest advantages of Lyft, but also a foremost concern amongst folks who maybe don't understand what it is, have never used it, they're not quite used to the concept yet. And so what I always like to do is I'll pull out my phone and I'll say, look, I can show you every ride I've ever taken on Lyft, where it started, where it stopped, how much it was, what the cost breakdown was. To me, that ability to have the digital history is paramount. I want to have that. That's a safety innovation that we weren't used to with respect to transportation if you go back 5 to beyond years. So that's one way of looking at it. Of course, on the consumer side, you need to ensure that Lyft, other companies are protecting that data. And certainly that's something that our policies have evolved and made sure that is of highest concern. One area I'd like to point out, which I think is very relevant to the discussion we've had and will be extremely relevant to AVs, is so then what happens when government wants that data? We've recognized there's a tremendous amount of information that we have in terms of how are folks getting around the city? How can we contribute to having folks who are planning for cities of the future? What are the traffic patterns and whatnot? Those information we'd like to be able to talk about and share, but also how do you ensure that there's the privacy protections in place when that information is being shared? And so these are all paramount concerns, things that we talk about every day. And of course, we do have data requirements that we have to report. And we always spend a lot of time talking about how do we make sure that there's confidentiality with those, that any data reports, because one of what the consumer expects, but then also the proprietary aspects of that information.
So we're running out of time. Let's do a quick lightning round. Couple quick questions. What are you all most excited about in terms of all the technologies we talked about? And the other question I'll throw out is, will people still be driving in 2030, or will government ultimately decide that because of those 94% of crashes caused by human error that we're too dangerous, we fall asleep too much, we get distracted too much, that we can't, it's too dangerous for human beings to drive anymore?
Yeah, so I think what I'm most excited about is all of this that we're talking about is going to change the landscape of our urban environments. Right. It's just going to change it for our children. Maybe we'll experience it as retirees, but that is something that is ahead. There will be fewer cars on the road. It will be a more pleasant environment to live in these cities where everyone is moving. So really excited about that. And your second one?
Oh, and do you think will driving go away? Will 100 years from now?
I hope it goes away. I hope it goes away because I agree. I think that, the human error is always there. And if it goes away, we've given ourselves 4.5 hours back a week to do something that is more valuable to us than sitting on the road, right? Less stress, less anxiety, more valuable time to connect with people and friends. I love the pictures of the autonomous vehicles where I have a family of 4 and I envision the 4 of us sitting to each other, right? Rather than looking at each other's backs. So I think that
like GM showed off at the 1960
community.
World Cup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I think what I'm most excited about is the new players that are entering the space, because I think it brings new questions and new perspectives, and it has actually elevated some of the conversations that are going on. And I think that's been extremely beneficial from the standpoint that we're talking about, issuing guidance in a much more open way than everybody's got to do rules and regulations. Whether or not 20 years from now we'll still be driving, I seriously doubt the government's going to mandate everybody have an automated vehicle. I mean, that doesn't sound very likely. I think the consumer adoption will drive how fast we get there. I really I've said it before, because I think that we didn't talk about it much on this panel, but there are levels to automation. We quickly talked about kind of self-driving as the ultimate. But there's a lot of stuff in the middle that will come and go. There's going to be a highway pilot mode. There might be a city mode. You might get both of those. You might get none of those. How consumers adopt and react to those the experience they have with those, how our good friends in the White Dome and DC react to those when bad things happen. That will all drive whether in 20 years we have 5% of the fleet or 50% of the fleet.
Yeah, I agree with Nat in terms of a future adoption and you know how quickly it becomes widespread. I think the thing that I'm most excited about and that GM's most excited about it and what we've mentioned is the safety benefits. I think that automation has tremendous potential in terms of safety, as well as increased mobility options for folks that may have not have had certain independence in terms of transportation. So I think that the future is very bright in transportation.
Okay. Well, I'm most excited that it's the end of the day and we're done with this conversation. But if you guys would honestly think about this, I've been in the wireless industry for over 20 years, and when I started, the phones barely did voice. And you look at how we evolved in that 20 years to have smartphones and how it's become such an integral part of your life. I think what Mary Barra said is exactly true. I think the technology in the car, what we're going to see in 20 years, is going to be light years ahead of what we have. It's going to be stuff that we've never dreamed about having, and I think that's the exciting thing about it, is that we're entering a new evolution, just like what we saw on the smartphones happen in the vehicles. I think that's my cue that I'm done, but that's what I'm excited about. Do I think that cars driving is going to go away? No, because I don't think all the technology is going to be in all the vehicles to do it, but I agree with Nat. I think you're going to see further enhancements to assisted driving. It's going to be the thing where driving, the car's going to make decisions for you, but it's still going to require some driver sitting in the driver's seat and paying attention. So I think you're going to get further enhancements of the assisted driving that we have today, but I don't see it totally going away in 30 years.
Yeah, and to echo, absolutely excited about the safety benefits as we move, towards AV and all the things that are potential. The sort of policy nerd answer for me is in the short term is, excited to see how states sort of develop their policies and regulations and what's going to work versus what might not work to strike the balance between safety and allowing innovation to flourish. And by 2030, I have no idea. But personally, I certainly hope that I have the opportunity to sit there behind, whatever it is, reading a book or catching up on the news, writing emails,